Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, Literary Aviatrix, and today I am talking with the author of the May 2026 Aviatrix Book Club discussion book, Mavis Perkins Flying Journalist. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the Literary Aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Cindy Weigand, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm delighted to be here, in fact.
Good. So am I. I'm delighted to have you. I'm delighted about this book. Would you give us a synopsis of Mavis Perkins?
You want me to read something, or do you want me to just tell about it?
I would love if you do both. Let's get a synopsis and a reading. That would be awesome.
Okay, I will read it first. In the roaring 20s, Mavis is living a life that is the envy of her friends. She's earned her pilot's license, and the newspaper she started is doing well. Working during the week, she flies airplanes on evenings and weekends. Off hours, she and her flying pals, the snooty skylarks, gather for hangar flying. She takes every opportunity to cover the aviation scene on Long Island. When she falls for a dashing aviator with an elite flying group, her life becomes complicated. They are worlds apart, a society girl from New York and a vagabond of the air from a small town. But that combination proves to be part of the intrigue, and the relationship makes for a wild and thrilling ride that touches both their lives in ways neither would have expected.
Yes, that's the blurb from the book. It's a great description. All right. So tell us about your background and what brought you to this book. How did we get to this book?
I had written some articles and things like that, I kind of always wanted to write, but never really delved into it. And then when my mother passed, I helped my father go through her things, and I found 2 scrapbooks full of articles. And those were intriguing. I found a poster from 1928. And so became really intrigued about what was going on. It was about a great uncle who was a barnstormer in the 1920s. But what really intrigued me was the loose articles I found. And there was an article about, his name was Jack. Jack and Viola attempted an endurance flight in 1929. And I looked at Viola Gentry's picture and I said, who? Because I don't really only heard about Amelia Earhart. You know how history's been with women in aviation. So
Sure.
I just went into this deep dive into women in aviation. I kind of forgot about my great uncle and just started researching these women. And I was amazed, just completely amazed. And so, from there, I wrote a book and published it traditionally, Texas Women in World War II. Because all my research led to the WASP, and they were amazing. And I was honored to conduct some oral histories. But I thought, I've really got to get back to my Uncle Jack because he really did something significant. So I wrote a biographical fiction about him novel, and there was a character I created. It's based on a real life aviator, but kind of a later time. She kind of took a life of her own, and readers liked her. And I said, I've got to cover her. Her name is Mavis Perkins. And so I gave her a life of her own in Mavis Perkins Flying Journalist. Seems like all the aviators had nicknames for one another. And so I gave her Flying Journalist. And that's how it came about. It's just a lot of retelling of my uncle's story, but in a more fun, relaxed way. I could really fly with these ladies. So
I love it.
that's how it came about.
I love it. Okay, so let's go back to that first book you mentioned, Texas Women of World War II. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, it
tell us a
is.
little bit more about that book real quick.
Well, I queried an editor I had met. I said, I would like to do a book on women pilots in World War II. And she said, I want you to do it about all the services. And I said, okay, and I was glad she wanted that because it really enlightened me to what all women did in World War II. Um, Coast Guard, I learned that there were spars and waves and women's of the Marine, that they were just the women Marines, and the WASP. So I include all of them. I include a Red Cross worker, even though that's not technically military, but neither was Red Cross. But those stories were amazing. And I interviewed them and listened, but it was when I started transcribing them that I heard their stories in their voices. And um, it was just a really amazing experience. Um, and I used some of the women I had interviewed, oral histories for TWU. Um, so I'm not a pilot, but I have done a lot of hangar flying with those who are.
That's cool. Well, little known fact, my grandmother was a spar in World War II. She worked at the Marine Safety Office in Galveston, and my grandfather went to register his boat, and that's how they met. And then I ended
I
up
love
having a
stories like that.
full career in the Coast Guard, but I've got a picture of my grandmother in her uniform. I should have put it behind me today. I didn't think about it. So
Mhm.
that's really cool that you did that book and that led you along the path to these other things. So, and then tell us a little bit more about Jack.
Jack was an interesting guy. He wasn't well known, but once I found out about him, I decided, I really have to write a book, and so it's really my homage to what he did, his contribution to aviation history. Even though he's not well known, he flew with some well known people like Jimmy Doolittle, and he knew Lindbergh. In fact, one of the pilots he flew with the Gates Flying Circus, flew Amelia Earhart across the Atlantic Ocean, is Wilmer Stoltz.
Uh-huh.
So he flew with some people and he knew these people, but, just from my research, I could kind of place every, where everybody was at a certain time. Of course, they're novels, so I make up some things, but I made it as accurate as I could. And then I said, who could be Mavis's friends? And then I thought, well, I really like Ruth Nichols. I think she's amazing, was amazing. And Francis Harrell was from Texas, and uh, Jack had flown in Texarkana, so that's why he was called a cowboy aviator. He wasn't a cowboy at all. So I thought, well, that's kind of a nice connection there, and so I just ran with it and I had fun with it. Um, Viola Gentry's in it, of course, and Bessie Coleman and Amelia Earhart. They make um, guest appearances. Ruth Elder. I actually have a picture of Uncle Jack with Ruth Elder. He met her on Long Island before he took off for the 1927 transcontinental race. So I have a picture of him. She is sitting on a propeller that is horizontal, of course, and there they are. And I have documentation that that is her.
That's
That
cool.
is Ruth Elder. So, it was fun to relate history in a story like that and
Yeah.
make them feel, real in real situations as much as possible.
Well, so I am not finished with the book, which I think is good so that I don't spoil anything unintentionally. But I did notice that, we meet these different characters that I recognize from our history. And there was one choice that you made that I was going to ask you about when we do meet Bessie Coleman. One of the things that we know from the time is that Bessie's story appeared a lot in black newspapers and didn't necessarily appear as often in white newspapers. And in our story, our main character meets Bessie briefly, but they don't have time to put an article together, so she's not going to write about her. Just tell me about that choice.
Well, I could have gone on tangents with all of them,
Yeah.
and I couldn't even really place Bessie there. at that race.
Realistically, timeline-wise? Yeah,
Right, and because she
yeah,
flew in a different part of the country, but
right.
I felt like people needed to know about her. The same with Hubert Julian,
Yeah,
and there's a. It's tricky to do that. We have a
yeah.
saying in writing that says, "You don't do by the way, Bob." Um, but um, I guess I pulled it off. Jackie liked it, and but it was a deliberate choice, and the way I have written a screenplay and the way I've written it is said it's real, and it's just kind of um, how did they put it? Brings attention how certain groups are forgotten in history or erased. So I was glad I did, and I was glad I pulled it off because it was tricky.
Yeah,
She was trickier
yeah.
than others. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge to try to figure out how to weave in. I'm doing this a little bit in some of my fiction where I'm weaving in characters of, you know, who may or may not have been in a place, and I'm trying to fictionalize it, but at least place them in the story so people can learn about them. So that's a
Mhm.
fun thing to try to figure out. Well, so I read, like I said, I'm not all the way through it, but I see the setup for where potentially this story is going, because you talk about a scenario or a time frame in which Billy Mitchell, who was a colonel and general and then a colonel again, was being court-martialed for saying that the United States was vulnerable to air attacks. I
Insubordination.
understand that he had many other personality quirks that sort of were involved in his court martial for insubordination. But tell us a little bit about the scenario that you're setting up with these characters.
Well, Billy Mitchell was being court-martialed for insubordination. He said the United States needed um, a Navy or an Air Force, dedicated Air Force, not part of the Army. And
And
I
in
guess a
this
lot of
moment,
people
we're
did.
in 1927 when he's
Right,
saying this and being court-martialed. Yeah.
right. And I guess people don't realize that there wasn't an Air Force. It was just part of the Army.
Hmm.
And so he was being court-martialed, and Clyde Payneborn and Ivan Gates, who were owners of the flying circus, paid a visit, or Hap Arnold paid a visit, and he was later head of the Army Air Forces, and he was also head of the WASP. So that's kind of an interesting
Yeah.
tie-in, and I
Yeah.
could have gone more that way too. Um, so they got to planning, and they thought, well, somebody needs to prove him right or something. And they said, well, way we can do that is do a mock air attack on New York City using the same maneuvers that they would have used in World War One. Jack didn't fly in World War One, uh, technically. I think he was a mechanic, and I think he learned to fly, which is if you fix an airplane, you have to fly it and test it, right? So I
Right.
think that's where he learned, and then it really took he he got more involved once he got back to the United States. He was from Kansas. Kansas was too boring. Um, but he set up a business between Shreveport and Texarkana. And Flying Circus came to New Orleans and set up headquarters. So that's how I connected him. That's how he joined. I have documentation of that. And of course, I lie and embellish that interaction. But yeah, Billy Mitchell, and he knew Hap Arnold, and um, I mean, they all knew each other, you know,
Yeah.
I think. Weren't that many of them. So they decided to do an aerial attack on New York City, and they
And the way that you describe it, I don't know if it's historically accurate or not, but the way that you describe it, they weren't being aggressive about it. It was more of an air show over the city so that families
mm,
could see it and enjoy it and not feel threatened by it. So it wasn't a terrifying thing, but it was just to
no,
prove this point, right?
right. And actually, I read later, a year later, they did do a mock battle.
Oh,
to
okay.
National Guards did, and I was wow.
Yeah, wow.
But
Yeah.
and there were probably others who did maneuvers. It was just an air show. It just was a
Yeah.
location, but, they were
Yeah.
gonna prove Billy Mitchell right, and probably and that's the way it was publicized. I have an article that says
Mhm.
so.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah, I
that was
found
kind
it
of fun.
interesting that he was like kind of like a Cassandra talking about how vulnerable not just the what is it, the conterminous United States or the contiguous United States are, but like the Hawaii and Pearl Harbor was vulnerable. I mean, he predicted, that as well. I
Right.
thought that was really
Mhm,
interesting.
mhm.
Yeah.
And they predicted how vulnerable New York City would be, and I
Yeah.
thought it was so prescient, when I first read it. I went, "Oh my goodness. This was in
Right.
1925."
Exactly. Yep.
And so, I learned a lot of history that I didn't know
Yeah.
researching this.
That's really interesting. And yeah, and you see in all of these memoirs that we're Jackie and Jenny Beatty and I are going through all these memoirs, these, primary source material and seeing all these names again and again. So yeah, the community was very small and interconnected and everybody knew everyone. And so it's really fun to get fresh angles like you've presented in this book with these characters. And even though Mavis is fictional, she's hanging out with real people and, talk about what do we call the girls? The 3 of them?
Snooty skylarks.
The Snooty Skylarks, very
Yeah.
creative. They have
Well,
their own little club.
I read when I read a book about the first Powerpuff Derby.
Mhm.
At the end, I believe it was Phoebe Only said that she wanted to name the group the Skylarks because they were deciding on the 99s or whatever, and she
Yeah,
suggested Skylarks.
I love it.
Well, I have watched a lot of video. There are some videos out there. One was about old timers on Long Island, and it had men and women aviators coming out, and they were laughing and joking and goofing and having a good time. And then they interviewed a guy, and I can't remember who it was. It was somebody I recognized. And he said, "Well, the women were good pilots. They had to be good pilots, or they wouldn't be out here." But I thought some of them were kind of snooty, and
Oh,
I thought they were probably tired of being hit on.
yeah,
Uh, they took it for snooty. So I took that and ran with it. I thought it was fun,
I think
that they
it's
would have
fun
their own
too.
little group, as opposed to the quiet birdman, which
Right?
nobody knows anything about.
Making
Jack was a
Skylark.
quiet birdman. So it was just kind of a joke in a way, but I thought it was kind of fun that they had their own
Very.
secret group.
I loved it. I thought that was very creative, and I see there's, like, a little dialogue about, maybe we'll create our own group with more women pilots, and so a little foreshadowing for what's to come. I love that. Well, so tell me
Cool.
about some other things that surprised you in your research or what inspired this character, Mavis. I mean, I can say from having read through a lot of these books that it's a real thing. I mean, there were journalists who were in aviation, and, Harriet Quimby was a journalist, and she definitely got like the PR side of things and how to promote herself. So talk about Mavis.
I knew about Harriet, so I guess it kind of goes back to her because she's one of the first I read about. Um, but I have a friend who worked at the Cradle of Aviation on Long Island, and she sent me an article about Alicia Patterson,
Okay.
who started Newsday on Long Island. It was a little later time period, but still, she was a journalist. And the article she wrote about all the women that were flying on Long Island at the time. And I said, wow, that would make a good character in my novel. So I created her, and she just came to life. She really did. Even for me, she came to life,
I love it.
and she was a lot of fun.
When you had the story done or ready to publish, let's talk about kind of how you got it into print. Tell me about that journey.
I self-published.
Yeah, why did you make that choice?
Well, I could get it out quicker. I self-published Jack's also because all along I saw this as a movie. I'm a movie enthusiast. I love the visual storytelling. And I had a screenplay in mind. So it's kind of a master plan. And I thought it'd be easier if I had the rights to that,
Mhm.
and it'd be easier to transition to that. The screenplay would be mine. Um, I also did not know I used a lot of pictures in Jack's story, family
Mhm.
pictures, and I used excerpts of articles because I didn't think people would believe it if I told them that they simulated an attack on New York City.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I wanted to clarify truth and fiction, or
Mhm.
verify that this is true, this is not. Well, I
Yeah.
have articles from the Graphic, which was a tabloid essentially at the time. I learned a lot of newspaper history too. And Ed Churchill's a character, and um, I think he worked or knew people with the Graphic. So I have articles from the Graphic that describes that. And I have not been able to find them online.
Wow.
I'm not a member of newspapers, so I can't search there. But just doing a, preliminary search, I can't find it anywhere.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, so it was kind of interesting. Another thing they did, and it's not a big spoiler alert because was in the news. There was a Zeppelin, ZR-1, USS Shenandoah, and it came into Coatesville, Ohio, right as they were there, and they had just landed, and they saw the blimp coming. So they took off and flew all around it, and I have an article on that too. And like 2 days later, it crashed.
Wow.
So, and you
Wow.
can, it's all over the place. A lot of
Yeah.
photos and everything. So, it was good to have documentation. I put it in so people would look these things up themselves and maybe learn some history too.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
but I can imagine flying around and seeing those men, the pilots in the little cupola or whatever they called it, and then knowing some of them had been killed 2 days later.
Yeah.
Um, so those are probably the two biggest events. Otherwise, it was just air shows.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And so, you talk about screenplays. What's the plan with that?
Well, I am marketing it and trying to push it a little bit. It's hard to get people to read them.
Mhm.
And one person did read it for me, and he said, "You have a story here." But and he suggested a few changes. So I rewrote it. I agreed with him. I rewrote it, and actually, the first people you see are Mavis, if I remember correctly, Mavis, Ruth Nichols, and Frances,
Neat.
because I know men don't read books, but they go to movies, and
Oh,
women do both.
that is an unfair generalization. The dirty little secret in our house is that my husband reads far more than I do. That is unfair. So my son too, so I don't know about that.
But it's been a little hard to get to promote, and I have
Yeah,
promoted to all sort of, and I knew that would be the case, but it was my homage to my great uncle, and I just let that, you know, I was I would just say, "Oh, okay, I'll accept what happens." And but anyway, so I did write the screenplay, and I'm submitting it, and it's doing pretty well. And of
oh,
course, it gives me
good.
something to promote my
Yeah,
books. Here, this is based off
yeah,
this. And I have connected with someone to give me an agent. And so,
okay.
um, things are coming together. And somebody's mentioned to me, she said, or he said, I can't remember, can't wait to hear more about your team. I said, there's no team, there's no we, it's me
Oh,
doing
wow.
all of this.
Yeah,
And so, it has been difficult to get the books, information about the books out. And my husband is a reader, but not, he read my book to satisfy me, I guess. But there are others who haven't. And I know,
yeah.
or I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not marketing it correctly. But
Well, speaking of marketing, what are you doing? How are you marketing?
Well, when I am accepted into a film festival, I do that. Um, you can submit films to a film festival. You can also submit screenplays. So I'm doing that, and it's very deliberate to try to get people on the East Coast uh, their eyes on it. Um, when something happens, I promote. I promote things that happen in aviation history. I'm a I know about the cradle of aviation. I follow them, and they do some really neat stuff. So I share that.
Mhm.
I share Jack's birthday and what he did and things like that.
What do you hope this book accomplishes, or what do you hope people take away from it?
I want them to know about the women who flew in aviation history because I didn't learn that growing up. I didn't know about them. And the sad thing is, I could have met some of them. I could have met Viola Gentry. She didn't die until 1988. Um, I did communicate with Eleanor Smith through a friend who wrote an article on her. I know.
Love
It's
her.
like, wow.
Yeah. I
Um,
know.
I cite the magazine. It was in Aviation History magazine, which is really hard. It was really hard for women to get something written. Um, it was written by Phyllis Moses. So I just want people to know because I think if, and there was prejudice, I know there was prejudice, but if we had seen them in history flying side by side at the same, not at the same time, but women were flying and men were flying. If we'd seen that in history, maybe we would have different attitudes, not only about aviation history and women, but about a lot of history. We've been there for a long time. And I hope that people who read it, and hopefully the movie will get made. It won't be a cheap one, but there just haven't been very many made on this era, and especially women flying in this era. It's
I
time we
like what
see
you
a
said
movie.
about making sure that people understand that women were doing this early on and had proven themselves over and over and over and over again before World War II and then during World War II and then had to do it all like starting from scratch like it had never happened again.
Mhm.
And now we hear people talking like it's something new, you know.
I
It's
know,
like at
and
what
then that
point?
amazes me. I mean,
Yeah,
how many times do you have to do this and prove yourselves as individuals?
exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
but
And
maybe
as individuals and then as a group, you know, as a
right.
representative of the capabilities of an entire group of people and
hmm
stop having to
I
hear, you know,
I
yeah.
think the 99s is an amazing legacy of those women. I have
Uh,
actually volunteered for a race that came through Bartlesville.
wonderful.
And yes, it was so fun. God, it was so hot. It was so hot, but, I took pictures, and it was so neat seeing these young women the same age essentially as the Paragraph Derby ladies,
Yeah,
and I just said, "I've gotta write a female version of this," and, but
love
I
it.
might start crying of this, but, what was particularly touching was to see the older women and
Mhm.
the connection they had that was so special and so few have. And, they were my age essentially, and they got off in the airplanes and flew home to Albuquerque and flew home to Bentonville, Arkansas.
The demographics of the air race are interesting from my observation because it happens like over several days, like in the normal week. So the people that you get out there are mostly old retired ladies who have time on their
Mm,
hands to do this kind of
mm,
thing. And then the young college girls who are supported by their aviation programs or go out and do fundraising to be able to compete. So it's really
yeah,
interesting to see that kind of there's
mm,
a big spread in the demographics of the air
yeah.
races
In
normally.
fact, I met a young woman who Spartan is just over as a crow flies half a mile away, and she was studying mechanics, and so she volunteered. And you're right; it was retirees, and
Yeah.
they needed a photographer. I'm not a photographer, but I had a camera and I could take pictures. So, but it was just. just seeing the whole process, what they do, and getting explanations. One woman's husband had met Louise Satan, and he showed me his picture with her. I know I'm going.
Amazing. Amazing.
So it was just a neat experience all the way around.
That's
Um,
amazing.
and I just greatly respect the women in aviation. I really do.
So, what has publishing these books done for you personally? How has it changed your life?
I think I've contributed to history, and whether it's a bestseller ever or not, it's documentation of what the Gates Flying Circus did, at
That's
least
right.
from my uncle's point of view. And I
Mhm.
have articles I can, back up what I've told pretty much. And so I just really like knowing about the women. And maybe if I'd known about them earlier, maybe I would have a pilot's license today. I don't know. Um, but I get out of it, what I have learned and what I can impart to others, what they can learn.
That's great.
Um,
So, what are you working
so
on now?
nothing. I'm working on promotion, and I don't know. I look at your website and I'm going, there are so many fine authors writing on this, and there are fine authors who are also aviators, in some capacity. I just don't see another book on that related. Although I would consider a collaboration. There's one person, one aviator that fascinates me, and she was kind of the black sheep, but her history fascinates me. And then at one time, a friend and I were talking about doing another book on the WASP, and it would be Ferry Command and Training Command, because people
Uh-huh.
really don't understand that difference, and there is a big difference. So
Yeah.
we were doing some research and stuff, and thought we had somebody lined up, and then Kate came up with her book, and we just wasn't good timing. But I would love to. I have, like I said, I've done some oral histories. I would love to get with the other four women, the four of us that I know, and maybe we could write a similar book on the women that we interviewed.
Whose book
And
you mentioned Kay came out with her book. Which book was this?
uh, Kate Landeck, or
Oh,
Women with
Kate.
Silver Wings.
Kate. Yeah,
Kate,
okay, got
yes.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm. And there were others, but she's the world authority. So, but I needed to get back to Jack's story, and I can tell a full story of women and men in aviation, how they did fly together. And I guess that's one thing I can impart on it, because I saw it in videos and I read about it, and
Yeah.
like I said, I know there was prejudice, but there was also some cooperation, and companies saw the value in having women fly their airplanes
Oh,
for
yes, they were
publicity.
happy to exploit women to sell their planes,
Right.
for sure.
Mm. And the women accepted it so they could fly airplanes. It's
I know,
kind of crazy.
I know.
Um,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think it's neat that you and the others, I know, several now, are that legacy. And I just think that is just wonderful.
Well, speaking of, I don't want anybody to think that there's like, we're running out of topics to write about. And in fact, as I work through the project that I'm working on, which is sort of a condensed history of women in aviation, I'm making notes on people who need their story told. So I fully plan to have a list of those things posted on the website when I get this book done, so people, if they're looking for people they want to go research and write about, they can hopefully find some inspiration there. So
Mm.
if you have people on your list that you've run across who need more about them written, please let me know who they are.
Right now, or
No, no, you can send me a note unless there's somebody
you know,
like burning your mind right now that
no,
you want to share.
there are a few that I can think of, and
Yeah.
I recently read an excerpt. And so it's introducing more to the history of ARC, the Air Race Classic. So there are women in there, and I've recently started reading about women who raced other than that. And that's
Yeah.
intriguing. It's like,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, they're just there with, they're right there.
Well, so you mentioned Kate Landeck, and all the respect to Dr. Landeck, who is my advisor for the project that I'm working on, one of them, one of 6 advisors. But Sarah Byrne Rickman, and her books are also out there. And Sarah Rickman has a new book coming out about the history of the Air Race Classic soon, so that's exciting too. Yeah, so that'll be a good read
It
for people.
is. And so, I mean, I've studied a lot, but I don't know everything. I'm far from it. So I'm still learning new people and
Yeah,
running across them. And I certainly did in the uh, mixed races. I'm going, oh, wow, this is really cool.
yeah,
So,
that's really
um,
cool.
and I do reading, Keith O'Brien's, is that his name? His book was amazing.
Fly
And
Girls,
my
I think
heart
so too.
still just aches for Florence.
I know.
I think about her. And, and I've read several nonfiction books as well. I mean,
Yeah.
fiction books as well. So, I don't know. I'm kind of saturated right now, I guess.
Well, keep at it. We're excited to see what happens with this. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap things up?
Not really, but I begin the book with a quote from Ruth Nichols, and it's what I try to impart, what I see or thought I saw between the men and women flying of that age. And it says, and this, my uncle certainly is part of this. Flying has nearly killed me many times. It has
Oh,
never made me rich. Yet from the challenge of the skies, I have reached humanity's most treasured reward, life in its fullest meaning for myself and in relation to others. I just think that's beautiful. And it just
everything
sums up and
everything about Ruth Nichols, I think, is beautiful. We
mm,
there's a For those of you who are listening who haven't seen it or listened to it yet, I have a very long conversation with Dr. Jackie Boyd and Captain Jenny Beatty, who are my co-hosts for the Aviatrix Classics, about Ruth Nichols' memoir "Wings for Life," and I mean, I fell in love with her as a human being reading that book. So I loved that
mhm.
you included her in yours. So it was great.
There were, of course, a lot of, I just thought that summed it up so perfectly.
Mhm.
And I got
Wonderful.
that from Women in the museum in Ohio,
Right.
International Women's Museum, Aviation Museum. They put
Mhm.
together a little video, and I went, "Oh my gosh, there's my quote."
That's
So,
awesome.
really,
Oh,
and I haven't read Ruth's book. I wish I could get it and read it, but I haven't.
oh, well, we can talk about maybe alone.
I don't know if I wanna be trusted with it. It's getting so valuable. Or in transporting it, that's the thing.
I know.
Um,
Well,
maybe I'll
Cindy,
visit Jackie and I can
there
read
you
it
go.
while
You
I'm there or something.
visit Jackie's. Yeah. Cindy, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for the work that you did to bring this history to life in this book. We're excited about discussing it in the Aviatrix Book Club on the last Sunday of this month, May 31st, and excited to have you be part of that conversation and enjoying your company in many book clubs as we have seen you many times in the conversations. So thank you so much.
Well, I find them very enlightening, and I like friending them on Facebook because I can go flying, right? I can go flying with them when they post the reels.
I love it.
So I live vicariously through them. But thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.